This is Chris Brown, Main Street Insider. We're interviewing Robert Weissman, who's the president of Public Citizen. We're going to talk today about the Citizens United Supreme Court case. During the panel you just did earlier today, you said there were three main elements of the ruling, and I wanted to talk about those three elements and sort of the history of them and how far back they go, and in particular whether which of those elements are most pernicious in the ruling. So the first element you talked about was money is speech, and how far does that go back in the Supreme Court history, and did the ruling change that or reaffirm it?
Yeah, I think of the three key underlying prongs, that's the one that had been in place before the Citizens United decision. That goes back to the Buckley v. Vallejo decision, so it's been around for 35 years or so. And there the idea is that spending money in an electoral context is First Amendment protected activity. And it gets categorized as money equals speech. Money clearly doesn't equal speech. On the other hand, that's a hard one to push back on all the way out, because anything that people do involves some spending of money. Legitimate speech does usually require some spending of money.
Okay, and the second one, which gets a lot of attention, I know, in the blogosphere and just in people's minds and hearts, is the idea of corporate personhood. It's not exactly the phrase the Supreme Court used, but you talk about that and sort of is the background of that, and you said it was sort of largely introduced in this case as an idea.
Yeah, well, the general idea of corporate personhood goes back to 1886 and a Supreme Court decision issued at that time. But although they set up this general idea that corporate institutions can be treated as people for the purposes of the Constitution, it didn't mean that automatically every portion of the Bill of Rights or every component of the Constitution was affected. Corporations didn't have any First Amendment rights until the 1970s. They didn't have any political speech rights until the late 1970s. And they never had equivalent rights to real, live human beings until the Citizens United decision. For 100 years, there's been an understanding that corporations have so much power they can't be treated the same as real people for the purpose of First Amendment and understanding what they can do in the electoral context.
So that gets us to the last one, that the idea that basically this is not a legitimate thing to restrict free speech on, is corporate money in politics is not a legitimate role for the government to take. And I wanted to just ask you about that, and also that also is sort of new to the Citizens United case.
Yeah, when they reached this conclusion, they overturned two decisions. One is actually named after Mitch McConnell, has established the idea, well, if there's a corrupting influence from corporate spending, something like a corporation's going to give a candidate something, the candidate's going to give them something back, that's a problem that is itself reason to regulate corporate spending. And even if there's the appearance of corruption, there's reason to do it. Well, the court said in this case, where there's an independent expenditure, uncoordinated spending from the company with the candidate, by definition there couldn't be any quid pro quo, because of course we know there's no coordination. Even more important, they overruled a decision called Austin, which said corporate spending and policy can distort the democratic process. Well, that actually happens to describe exactly how things work in Washington, and state houses and city halls, and everyone in the world understands it. 5 justices said no. I think they probably are the only 5 people in Washington, D.C. who believe that corporate spending doesn't distort politics, assuming that they in fact do believe it.
Okay, and last one is, what is Public Citizen and other groups doing to fight back from this decision and try and get some progress on getting back to sane laws for America on this issue?
Well, there's a bunch of things that we can do legislatively to mitigate the harm. So a really modest version went through the House, is now up for grabs in the Senate, called the Disclose Act, which would require corporations to at least disclose when they're spending money, either directly or running it through front groups. That's a positive, very modest step forward. We can do more ambitious things. For example, we could say government contractors can't make any campaign contributions. Almost every big company is a government contractor, so that could be far-reaching depending on how it was drafted, for example. The most important thing legislatively, certainly, is to get public financing of our public elections. And that's still an uphill fight, but we've got a lot of momentum in the House, a long way to go in the Senate. But even if we have public financing of elections, we don't solve the Citizens United problem. Even if every candidate for Congress, say, was given $1 million, plus had the ability to raise small donor funds, they still would be up against the threat of Exxon coming with a $5 million campaign, or the Chamber of Commerce coming with a $10 million campaign against them. The only way to overcome this problem of Citizens United is to undo the decision. So we're supporting a constitutional amendment, as are many groups around the country. I think there's a lot of momentum building around it. We've got a website up, don'tgetrolled.org, where people can sign on to support the idea. And most importantly, right now, we're working with People for the American Way on a pledge campaign asking every federal candidate, every candidate running for Congress or Senate, to pledge to support a constitutional amendment to overturn the decision. We think that's a very good thing for progressives to do generally. It frames issues exactly right. It's very clean. Are you for corporate power? Are you for corporations buying elections or not? And people should be forced to answer that question.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.